Welcome to the AsYetUnknown podcast. My name's Alex Snyder, your back pocket consultant and connection catalyst. Entrepreneurship is a bit like bungee jumping, a big leap into the unknown, and it can be a lonely, bumpy ride. It's also one of the most empowering and liberating things you can do. Each episode is a dose of fresh perspectives designed to leave you feeling connected to innovative ideas and inspired about growing your business your way. Thanks for tuning in. Now let's have an adventure. So welcome, John. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so excited for this conversation. Been looking forward to it. So really quick, I just want to introduce John. You have such an incredible story. Honestly, I'm not sure where to begin with an introduction that does you justice, but you have built, scaled, and sold SISU. You've had JayZ as your chief visionary officer along the way. You've created an incredibly informative social media platform in the past year where you share insights that help people better understand the economy, emerging tech, and so much more. And now you're heads down in the launch of your next venture in the AI space. So there's so much there. Thank you for being with me. Please feel free to add on to that introduction.
Yeah, it's kind of one of those crazy things because when you say it like that, you have to kind of look back at the beginning for me. So I always, one of the things I always think is that, newer entrepreneurs, when they're getting in this space, the whole thing is they're like, oh, there's this overnight success, but it's actually 15 years in the making. And so I think, if it's all right with you, I can just start at the beginning and just kind of go because when I got out of college, it was anything but glamorous. I was in the middle of 2010, so the middle of recession. There was no ability to get a job or anything like that unless you went to like Princeton or Stanford. And I knew I needed to move to San Francisco because one of the lessons that I learned in competitive athletics is that if you want to be the best in the world, you have to compete against the best in the world. So I moved there, had no idea what I was going to do. I ended up just hustling. I drove a limo and slept in my car. I actually had a 16-unit apartment building that I used to manage, and I used to rent out my room and literally sleep in the limo because I could arbitrage the value in between it. And then I would work on the side actually building apartment complexes in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So I was doing pretty much everything. And then I had one night that changed my life. It was kind of crazy, but I met one of these people and he was 25 years in McKinsey. He basically is like, why are you driving a limo and who are you? And he actually worked at PayPal previously. And I'm like, oh, wow. Do you know Peter Thiel by chance? And he was like, that's funny. I'm actually giving Peter Thiel an award tonight. Would you like to meet him? Yeah. And so so I'm like, of course. I mean, how many times do you get to meet a billionaire in your life? So I'm thinking I'm going to be at the back of this event, whatever. Ends up being my name card, Peter Thiel's name card. And so I'm sitting there, I have dinner with this guy, and it's like absolutely insane. I slept in my car the night before, slept in the car like that, and I ended up pitching, had a couple mentors from Wharton that helped me pitch this other guy, not Peter Thiel, but he had already previously funded a company. So then I got my foot in the door with tech. And so I started with tech. I did customer service. I was the first customer service person at the company. We grew up to like 25 people. And then, I had an informative thing happen to where someone told me, I was complaining at the time, just being like, I want to grow faster. I want to grow in my career. And he's like, well, what can you do that no one else in the world can do? And that was kind of lesson number one for me, is that you have to build a hard skill in order to be able to move to those next levels. Because if you look at entrepreneurs, everyone likes to tout the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world. But at the end of the day, the average entrepreneur starts in between 30 and 40 years old, because that's really like the point at which you've got aptitude that's meeting experience. Exactly. It's super important. And so for me, I went through and I taught myself to code in about 3 months. So I taught myself to code in 3 months. And then because I wanted to solve the problems that I was looking at on the customer service side, so ultimately did that for about 3 years. And I became an entrepreneur before I became an entrepreneur. So I started working on projects within the company, and the company before SISU, effectively what happened was I worked at a company called Teespring with some really, really talented people. It was funded by a bunch of the big VCs. If you've ever bought a T-shirt on Facebook, they were the company, and it was one of those things where they let go 50% of the staff the first 2 weeks that I was there, and it was one of those like it felt like just straight up starting a company just like SISU. They were like, we have 2 months to survive. Let's go. So we got funding from Sam Altman. We had a couple months to live. So we built a $60 million revenue stream from scratch based on the infrastructure that they had, because if they could sell on Facebook, then they can sell on Wish, eBay, all this stuff, right? And so, we built out all the infrastructure. I built a dynamic pricing model, like, how Uber, when it gets busy, they charge higher prices. So I basically built that whole thing to kind of work with our model as well. And just in a weekend, it created about $1 million in EBITDA per month. So it's like 12 million to the bottom line. Those kind of two steps together with the company helped us kind of get off the bottom, become profitable. And then they offered me a CTO position. I said, no, thank you. I'm going to start a cannabis manufacturing facility. So Mars circuitous life paths, it makes perfect straight line, right?
Totally. Just before we jump into that, can I ask, I want to or highlight something that you said, which is you were an intrapreneur before you were an entrepreneur. And I really relate to that. And I want everyone who's kind of listening to hear that, because we hear the stories of entrepreneurship and we see it as really sexy, which, I think there's more discourse about it these days, that it's maybe not all sexiness. But I think the value of entrepreneurship in general is incredible, but also on the path to entrepreneurship. And I know for myself, actually both things you resonated, right? I had a decade in corporate consulting, strategy, operational improvement, M&A. I got to see so many companies, so many problems before I struck out and started, helping and building startups. Like that level of kind of skill set was what made me able to be an entrepreneur in terms of my approach to it. But also I was always the person, creating ideas or groups or getting asked, hey, we have this kind of issue. And it was like, oh, well, like, let's do X. And like, I'll just run off and set up a group where I'd bring together the lead partners from every, vertical within KPMG to talk about, how we were going to tackle this industry that like we kind of gotten like a little sidetracked on. And I think what we don't realize is like that is so important. And that really did set me up for entrepreneurship in a way that, I just
100%.
wouldn't have had 10, 15 years earlier.
And you have that safety net. And that's what's so important that people don't realize, is that entrepreneurship is so great because while you're in that learning phase, you have this safety net that you can go through. You have mentors that you can talk to, because, when you do entrepreneurship, you try to get a board of advisors, but a lot of times you can feel alone. And so you want to feel as prepared as possible before you start that process.
Yeah. And you're right. It's that like safer place. Like it was kind of a bit awkward to go reach out to these, global heads who didn't know, but they were in my company, right? It's like, hi, excuse me. Like this person.
It's me, Alex.
But I have this idea, and I think it'd be really valuable. Like, could I get 40 minutes of your time to sit in a room with like the other heads of global blah, 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 is, a really great primer for when then you're like, hey, venture capital X or, billionaire person, I would really love some time. Like, could I fly to New York and buy you lunch to like pick your brain for 45 minutes? Which is something that I did at one point, and again, that like, that was a lot less safe than it was in the company, but I'd kind of already been through enough like, hi, maybe. And also figuring out how you have those conversations, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Because, people's time, once you get to those levels, when people are worth, let's say 50, 100 million, $1 billion, their time becomes unbelievably valuable. But the thing that I have recognized is that at the end of the day, they recognize that giving future time to future entrepreneurs is one of the most impactful and leveraged things that they can do. So when I drove the limo, I used to drive this guy. His name was Martin Mikos. He sold as this Finnish guy, awesome. Sold MySQL for 1.2 billion. He ended up making, he owned 10% of the company. And he would just go out of his way and just meet with these 23 to 25-year-old entrepreneurs. He would drive from Los Altos to San Francisco to have lunch with them and then go back because he wanted to give.
Yeah, 100% have had those experiences as well. And I think it's also helped shape me to know that that's a priority for me as I kind of grow and have more opportunity. So I think it's like a great chain. So let's come back to your story. I mean, cannabis, you went from tech, CTO offer to like, no, I'm going to build a cannabis manufacturing facility. Cannabis is generally regarded as the Wild West. And I would say the US is even more complicated given the legislation and banking. At least when we were foraying into it in Canada, we had federal regulation on our side.
Yeah.
There are so many who try and fail to enter this market. So I would really love to understand what were the pillars that made SISU's business model and product different and ultimately led to your success.
Oh, that's a great question. Well, yeah, I think kind of starting at the top, one of the things that, I'm gonna use a parable really quick because it was actually the story that allowed me to start Sisu. So I read this book. It was called, gosh, what was it? It was Asymmetric Risk and Reward to Hondo Investors by a guy named Manish Pabrai. And Manish Pabrai, he runs a $500 million hedge fund and just a brilliant guy. And he told this story about the Patel families in the 1970s. And effectively, what it came down to is that in the 1970s, there was hyperinflation. And when gas prices were really high, think about what happened to the hotels along the highways. They all went down. So if you ever hear Hotel California and stuff like that, these kind of, these places, yeah, they went through it. So one of the things that people didn't realize is basically an opportunity happened to where Patel families, they were moving from India and they were scooping up these properties that normally, let's say they're $100,000, you could buy for $2,000. And the key is understanding the statistics of success. So it was an 80% chance that they would make 3 to 5x on their money. It was like a 15% chance that they can make 10x on their money. And then it was like a 5% chance that they would fail. And so when you look at those statistics, you're like, no one wants to fail and lose everything, right? That's really scary. But the key silver bullet is that you could save up those $2,000 to take another shot and do it again. And the odds of failing twice with those statistics is 1 in 400, right? So once you do that, you can see that it's far less risky than you think. And so it started me getting thinking about this whole process of time. And so I don't think of money as money. I think of money as time. And that's actually, that kind of goes to the social media and all the stuff that I'm doing. But the way that I looked at Sisu is I ultimately invested $150,000 into the company. And I guess a little more backstory behind it is, I had two options at the time. So crypto was obviously taking off. I was actually, going to possibly be like director of engineering for Coinbase. And then on the other side, I had cannabis. And the reason why I chose cannabis is because I couldn't understand the business models. If I can't understand something, I don't like to move forward with it. And cannabis was a simple business model that I understood. And it was a $150 billion industry coming online that already existed, but needed to be modernized. And so when I looked at the process, I'm like, okay, so I think that I could, let's say, if you think statistically, I can make between like 10 to 100x on this. And the goal for me was to buy financial freedom because time is the most valuable asset on this planet. And so I was like, if I spent 150,000 at the time, I could probably save that in about a year. So I'm like, would I risk 1 year of life to make 10 to 100x of life, right? And when you look at that from that perspective, it becomes an asymmetric bet. And it's the key in life is understanding when you have an asymmetric bet in front of you, because it's very rare. You maybe get like 5 or 10 in your whole life. And when you see one, you have to know that you have those things. And it comes with specific variables, right? So one variable that we had is that, I'm from Humboldt. So I'm from Humboldt County, and that was really nice because I knew the area. My family has been in this community for a while, so that was structural advantage number one. And then structural advantage, and because of that, I was able to get in these licensed facilities. I was able to secure a spot because we knew people, and that was fantastic. The second, even bigger one is that, friends are really important in life. And I got I had a friend, Cameron Forney. He started an unbelievably huge company. It's called Select, so also known as Cura. And they sold in $1 billion transaction to Curaleaf. And at the time they were moving, this was like when they were not that big. They were in Oregon at the time, and they were just starting to expand to California. And they took a 25% market share in the entire California $4 billion market in 90 days. And we helped them do it.
Wow.
Yeah. Just talk about insane market penetration. But yeah. So basically what we did is we were a toll processor. And so what a toll processor does is they take a raw unfinished good and they convert it into they convert it into a finished good. So basically what we would do is we would take the cannabis trimmings or trim, because everyone sells the flower, which is the high value product, and we take the lower value product, we distill it down with, with different types of extraction methodologies, and we convert it into cannabis distillate. And the distillate is what goes inside of the vape pens as the baseline constituent. Think about it like flour, right? You got flour, and then you add the flavors to have sugar, and then you get your bread or your treat. So yeah, so we went through that process, but it was not all sunshine and rainbows. We started within the first week, our machine broke, and we were totally down, dead in the water, completely toast. And at that point, we're down to, I don't know, $30,000 from 600,000. So we'd raised that seed capital. We went all the way down to zero. And I'm like, okay, my life's over. This is perfect. My co-founders are unbelievably innovative and have the ability to just fix any problem. So Shannon, one of my co-founders, did an awesome job. She fixed the machine. We got a new machine. We were able to get everything going. And then at that point, then we had problem number two. So problem number two is we have $20,000 in our bank account. We're competing against Flowcana and all these other big companies that have raised hundreds of millions of dollars in capital. And at the time, there was a lot of capital flowing into the industry. And we're like, okay, so now we have a massive constraint. So how do we get past this? And the way that we did it is Joe is the idea man. Joe is my other business partner, and he's just such a unique mind. And we realized that we could do a profit split. And the way that we could do it is, the quote that I love from Jeff Bezos is, your margin is my opportunity. And you had all these people that were used to just making so much money. And I'm like, I'm just going to be way more efficient. I'm going to build a more efficient mousetrap. So what we did is we did a 60-40 split, to where we gave 60% of the profits to the farmers, and we did 40% of the profits would go to SISU. And this was in the first year when distillate was selling around $9 a gram. And we did it for two people, and trim at the time was going for like $150 a pound. We ended up paying them $300 a pound. So they were getting double. And so you can imagine that word quickly got out. So from there, we signed up another 30 farms. We got rolling really, really quickly. And then the thing that really solidified the company is, as soon as we saw that this model worked and we saw these companies had raised so much money, we were like, we have to move as fast as possible. And when you have an edge, you push it as hard as you could possibly go. That is where companies are made or broke. Like, what I always tell my team is that there are basically like 5 decisions that you're going to make in your entire company's history that are going to be the things that make or break it. So when you find it, you make it count. And so in March, basically from about October to March, we upgraded our machine. Shannon rebuilt our entire manufacturing facility 7 times, because we were not messing around. We would literally, like, if we had a pump go down, we would fly. I remember one time we flew an employee. We basically had a pump go down, and I calculated, I'm like, okay, we're losing $10,000 an hour right now. So we just got him like on a red-eye flight, flew to Phoenix, Arizona, picked up a water cooler, drove it back. And we would do those hero moves all the time, because one of the core principles of SISU is that life is a game of inches, and inches turn into miles over time, and they seem imperceptible, but then they just go. And so going back to March, we rebuilt our facility 8 times in about like 4 or 5 months. And then we launched the 70-30 split, because the way I looked at it, we had a 500% increase in production capacity. And if I'm giving 10% back, then it's still 375% net increase. And so from there, Joe, in a 2-week period by himself, signed up 150,000 pounds of cannabis under contract before anyone knew about it. And in a 2-week period, we had monopolized California.
Wow.
And that is one of the things that made it. That was super, super important.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
This is like 6 month, like, doom to domination kind of trajectory.
100%. And it was such a wild time, because like we had signed up, we had signed up, and we had got through that process, and we knew things in the market that other people didn't know. So, because I've obviously probably I'm kind of a math guy. So like I broke down, how many acres of cannabis it took to change the entire market, right? So to saturate the market. And it's much lower than people think. So if you kind of do conservative math on it, and you break it down, it takes about 8,000 to maybe 16,000 acres of cannabis to feed the entire nation. And so that's the equivalent of like 16 corn farmers in the Midwest, which is nothing.
Yeah.
And so that brings us to door number two. So door number two is right after we finish that process. I'm like, okay, we're building a great company. This is awesome. We did $3.8 million in our first year. Then we did $38 million in our second year, 2019. But as we were scaling, I remember in May, do you remember like Adam Bierman and stuff like that?
Mm.
Adam Bierman, he was on South Park and he was like kind of that character. So in May, it was crazy. On the same day in May, I was at Hall of Flowers and I had met Cameron. Cameron's just like, hey man, we got $1 billion merger going down. This is so crazy. I meet Adam Bierman and he was exactly what you expect him to be. And I'm like, I see everyone just bouncing around and it seemed like I was like in an Enya song. And I'm like, this is a bubble. This is 1,000% a bubble. And literally in that week, the stock market dropped, like I watched it drop 80% over the next 90 days. It was crazy. And so it's just so funny when you get to see those things in life for real. And that kind of brought me to door number two, which is I knew it from the beginning, but I knew that this industry was going to move fast. And the segment that I was in the industry, it was going to be important to kind of push towards a liquidity event. And then that brought me to door number two, which is where I kind of focused on the M&A process, because I knew that our company by itself, we sat in the middle of the supply chain. And in order for us to really succeed long-term, we were going to have to vertically integrate with other companies in order to reach the places that we wanted to go.
Wow. So
yeah. A lot to unpack there.
Taking it all in. That's such an amazing ride to, like you said, that first kind of like doom to domination in 6 months, and then just really understanding your options and being ready to like make those decisions and act on it and, bet the farm, I guess, pun not intended, but really, you have to kind of be ready in entrepreneurship. And I say this, you have to be ready if you want to be building a company the size that you built it, right? There's a lot of different kinds of entrepreneurship. There's a lot of different risk tolerances. So knowing what you actually want to go for is obviously super important. Just want to put that caveat out there. But so, the next step is your sale. And I would argue that the only thing harder than managing a growing business is managing it while running a transaction. In my consulting days, I remember thinking like, oh my God, M&A is such hard work. And typically you were actually only responsible for part of the sale of part of the business, in the way that we would have, work streams and teams, and, I'd have people working for me. And when I was managing the sale of Patio, I was simultaneously running our startup and overseeing and executing the full transaction. And yeah, let's just say I learned a whole new world of pain. We were not nearly of the notoriety that you were, but so, talk to me about that experience, because you had to deal with the process, but you were also dealing with, an industry that was still considered quite nascent and controversial, and you had also some pretty big personalities in there.
Yeah. There was definitely, I kind of love that stuff though, because ego leads to blindness. So whenever I see big egos, I'm like, awesome. I love that, because you are just like fed up in your own world right now and you're not seeing the world clearly. And so, yeah, those are always my favorite.
Definitely.
But yeah, so 100%. So 2019 was kind of a wild intermediary year. It was, we went from like 3.8 million to like 38 million. So you can imagine kind of the growth scale that it went through. We went from being in 400 square feet up to like 20,000 square feet. And we started just tacking on a bunch of different things. And then really 2020 is the year that we started the M&A process. And that's where things got really crazy. So I had got our investment banker kind of middle of 2019. We were putting together our financials and getting everything ready. And then I guess it was middle of 2019, we went through the process. But basically what ultimately happened is we were working with a process to where that this was actually really complex, because we worked with this company called Left Coast Ventures, and Left Coast Ventures was this company that sat underneath that was basically had a bunch of ownership ties to Subversive Capital. And so basically the whole goal for them long term with like Privateer and Left Coast Ventures is they were going to roll up into this SPAC that had $545 million into trust. So you just had this unbelievably complex event of things to where if you don't know about how a blank check company works or a SPAC, generally it's an anomaly that we've only seen in the past 3 or 4 years. But effectively, there was so much liquidity in the market that people were literally putting money into these companies before a company was even found. And then you would use the money that would sit there to then buy a company. So Richard Branson's company went through that process. And I don't think it's something that's going to last long term. It was a function of this excess liquidity time that we had. But that was, it was definitely important to have cash in cannabis, because I knew that there was ultimately going to be a liquidity crunch, and the people that had access to capital that managed it well were going to be able to do well. And we're watching that in real time right now. Yeah. And so, you know, as we went through the process, you've got the fun courtship side, which is where you kind of meet a bunch of different suitors, you go through the process, and that's the fun part of the process, because you're just kind of talking through your business and everything, and you're getting that stuff together. Once you really find the person, you know, we had about 3 or 4 people that we were actively working with, and once you get to the person that you actually want to work with, you go through, you know, your term sheet. And the term sheet is this really, really small, like dumbed down version of what the purchase and sale agreement is. And I call that the happy times. So those are the happy times where the knives are not out.
Possible.
What was that?
Everything's possible. I call that like the realm of the possible, right? It's like, what could this be? It's so great. It's going to be amazing for everyone.
Yeah, this is going to be perfect. I see this number that is on one line, and that seems awesome. And then you get to the purchase and sale agreement. So if you've never gone through that process, that's where rubber meets the road. So you've got a lot of different components in that. And maybe I'll kind of like I don't know how you want me to go through it, but there's kind of like, I can kind of tie in where the business was going as well as where the purchase and sale was, because they're kind of consequential together with one another. Because one of the things that I'm just going to forewarn people up front is, when you start the process of M&A, you want to make sure that your underlying business is as sound as physically possible. Because when it comes to negotiation, you know, when you get to high levels of business where people are working with hundreds of millions of dollars of capital, there's not nice guys anymore. They are no longer nice at that level. You are swimming with sharks. You need to know you're swimming with sharks, and they are waiting for you to trip. And so for me, it was always, our business was always number one. That was what mattered more than anything. And then the process of doing the M&A transaction was number 2, because I knew that if you had one, you could have the other. And we can kind of go into those lessons after that. But yeah, so during that time, we did like 38 million. And as we were kind of negotiating the process, our business scaled massively, which helped us in the negotiation. So we realized that if we wanted to get access to the cannabis at the same time, then we also wanted, or the trim full time, we wanted to also get access to the flower, because if we could sell their flower, then we could also get first right of refusal on the trim, which was the product that we cared most about. That was really our profit center. So we sold at a really, really small margin the flower for our farmers, and we had 500 different farms at that point. So then our business scaled from 38 million in 2019 to 101 million in 2020. And so the only reason why I say that is because when you're going through the negotiation process, they're kind of waiting for you to trip, and our business exploded. Right. So it put us in a really good position to be able to negotiate the things that we wanted as we went through the process. But yeah, step number 1 is kind of the term sheet. You sign that. And then, feel free to stop me at any point as you go through, because you're a master of this stuff. I've only gone through it once.
No, I want to highlight something that you said, which was actually like the strategy that you used, right? So you create an opportunity for your farmers to have kind of a one-stop shop to sell their good. You gave them, I'm assuming if you're selling at a small margin, a really great price on their flower. You'd already found a way to give a really good price on trim. So you position yourself strategically to create like a win-win for your suppliers and yourself, exactly, which gave you a market opportunity that no one else had. So, we're kind of here to talk about M&A, but like you said, build a strong business, you essentially figured out your stakeholders, and you were like, how do I make this a win for them? That's a win for me. Right. And I think that is something that stakeholder management and understanding your stakeholder ecosystem is amazing. And actually the same thing applies in M&A, right? Like what's driving people, what's important to them. Yes, they're waiting for you to trip up. We were in a same position. We actually had a sale fall through in March, April of 2020 due to the buyer needing to lay off half their business. And then, we were pretty impacted as well. But basically after 2 months of being like, oh shit, what are we going to do? In the following 10 months, we actually tripled in size and exited 10 months later in a better position.
Wow.
So, similar opportunity of like just figured it out. This is part of why I started this series, right? I am so dead set passionate about the fact that there are opportunities in recessionary times. You just have to have your strategy, your resource allocation, your plan. And I think what you spoke to at the beginning and throughout is like that willingness to hustle, right? Like that willingness to like figure it out, make really hard decisions and just go for it. So I don't want to take us too far off, but what you mentioned around the strategy and, what we wanted was trim, but we were able to sell flower at a, really thin margin for ourselves, but it made us a great buyer for our vendors. I think is like really, really powerful.
Yeah. And I love that you said that. So I always think about David and Goliath. So one of the things that you kind of think about, and I've noticed this a ton, is that, excuse me, both recessionary environments as well as boom times cause both pros and cons. So if you have what we've gone through since like 2010 to like 2022, you have this massive liquidity environment, right? So these companies are getting tons and tons of money. And what that does is it breeds massive inefficiency, right? Because I used to work in tech. We're talking like, we've got massage chairs and ping pong tables and lunch every day, and it's chaos. It's just like the craziest thing. If you've never been in tech, it's like the craziest thing. It's like the show Silicon Valley. And because of that, whereas on the other side, when you have companies that have no money, it breeds innovation because you have no choice but to innovate your way through problems. And then also in bust times, like recessionary environments, you also get access to incredible talent. So you just have to know what phase of the market. I'm definitely a macro guy and I like to kind of follow it because if I'm rowing a boat, I want to know what's happening in the ocean that I'm rowing, right? Yeah. Because one of the lessons that I've learned in life is that the direction and where you're rowing matters just as much as not, if not more than how hard you're rowing. And I'm like the hard work guy that wants to believe the will.
I mean, I do, advisory and strategic planning. I'm all about you have to know where you're going. You can be in the bottom of your boat, rowing. If there's no captain at the helm, like, good luck, right?
Yeah, exactly. Or the tidal wave is coming your way, and you're like, this is definitely the right direction to go.
Yeah, just row harder. Be fine.
Yeah, of course.
I think what you said is really so important. And I just want to make sure that people are capturing this as they're listening to it, either live or after. And it's not just tech. So I think it was 2013, I went out to Africa to work in mining. I don't know if you recall, but the price of gold dropped by about 50%. And I remember, I don't think I will ever forget somebody saying, well, we just, it had also grown by 100 and something percent over the last few years, right? It's a commodity. It didn't get that much harder to take gold out of the ground in that time. Eventually, yes, it will. Different topic. But basically somebody said to me, well, we just got really used to it. And it was like, I remember it says something like, it was a sushi parties and blah, blah, blah. And like, this is out in the middle of Africa. Where are you getting your sushi? Yeah. That basically people got fat and, assets were bought and acquisitions, they were never integrated. It was just like the money to be had for selling the product was so big that there was just no need for any kind of efficiency, operational optimization, anything. And when suddenly the market corrected and you went from $1,800 an ounce to $900 an ounce, it was like, well, we can't get it out of the ground for that. Okay, but you were 2 years ago. 2 years ago it was $600 now. Like it's
interesting.
Yeah, you get these cycles and we acclimatize so quickly. But to your point, the opportunities that come up in the bust cycles around talent, I think is one of the biggest ones. And I know that I've been talking to my clients for over a year about make a plan, know where you're going to cut when. if you have to, so that it's a plan that's not emotional, that you're ready to communicate and execute when you hit a threshold, but also know what opportunities you're willing to invest in and look for ways to secure, longer term contracts, bank some war chest, and be ready to jump on those opportunities. So I think your example is so strong around the benefits if you do it right, obviously.
No, 100%. I love that. And we could go on and on about stories. I have so many stories around that side, but I 1,000% agree.
Yeah. But tell us a little bit more around kind of the process and some of the key things that you really learned going through the M&A process.
Yeah. And, I can go through some of the more like the boring mechanics, but just to kind of hit the top level things of, obviously people want to hear about the M&A side is when you have the purchase and sale agreement, and just correct me if I'm off base, I've kind of repressed a lot of these memories as I went through the process.
Same, honestly.
Yeah. And so, top level, you're going to have your terms, right? So when you go through your purchase and sale, we're talking a 250-page document that you're going to want to redline every single thing. So you've got your terms that you're going to go through, which is just like what price and at when. You're going to have your covenants. So that's going to be restrictions as you kind of go through the process, making sure you don't, sell part of your ownership to some African mining company. And you're like, oh, actually, I don't own this company anymore. Right. So you'd be surprised when you read through the covenants, you're like, wow, that happened. That's why it's in the documents. Like when you see a hair dryer that says like, don't put this in the bathtub, you're like, it's there for a reason.
Somebody did this.
Someone did it. Yeah. And so, covenants will have kind of those baseline. And then really the big thing that you're going to, do a lot of negotiation on is your general representations. So you've got reps and warranties. And so those are the things that protect the buyer as they buy it, because if you break any of those things, they can cause, charge damages and clawback kind of pieces. So the two things you've got is you've got general representations, which are more customized. And those are things you're going to say, well, I want you to do these certain things. I want you to have this amount on your, on your balance sheet. I want you to do these things during like the 3-month process we have it. And then the last one is fundamental reps, which are generally pretty boilerplate. So fundamental representations are like, did you commit fraud?
Yeah.
And, making sure we're doing everthing by the book.
And so to be also illegal, not just contractual issues.
Exactly. So you read that and I'm just like, wait a second, I'm in cannabis that's federally legal. Am I immediately breaking a fundamental rep? So you had to look through a totally different lens. So, go through that process. It's like 30 pages of scary. And then you come to the disclosure schedule. So one of my friends, Joe Ferrari, he told me about, he always described it, disclosure schedule as your friend. So what you do during that process is you make a massive document about everything. You have a whole data room that you go through, just saying every piece about oh my God, forever. We were working, and it was like, and we're working with top tier law firms. We're working with Dorsey and Cooley, and they're pros. So they do all the biggest, so on it. They, when you talk to them, they got it down. So you make this massive data room. You write everything about your company, because what that does is that if anything happens during the transaction or after the transaction, then you could be like, oh, hey, I already told you about this. But if it doesn't exist inside of the disclosure schedule, then they could be like, well, you didn't tell me this about your business. You were omitting stuff. So blah, blah, blah. I'm going to hit you with damages.
Yeah. And just a note here for everyone listening, this is why it's really good to have good files and systems in your business.
Yes.
If you do go through this process, the disclosure schedule is so long, and it's essentially a log of everything. And you're going to need to locate every contract you've ever had, every agreement, every account that's ever been tied to your business, essentially. So really good reason to be prepared. This is when you see people, having a successful exit and celebrating all the money they made. You don't even know the minutia that they've been through. I think everybody has a level of post-traumatic stress with these things. It's so high stakes, and it's so much detail. And by the time you've looked at it for the 15th version or 28th version, it's just like you're just looking, needle in the haystack to make sure that everything is there.
100%. And it was so crazy. So I'll get to my kind of like, oh my God moment, because you definitely have it as you go through the M&A process. But the last two things on the document that I'll tell you my like crazy version of that is, you've got the last two things. You've got the closing process section of the document, which is going to kind of take you through like, what are the things, a big thing that happens at the end is you've got like crazy distributions that happen. Like you distribute an amount on your balance sheet. We had some crazy terms. So I had to do like 7 distributions in a row to be able to like pay taxes for everyone on the SISU side. And then going through that. And then last but not least is like termination clauses. So talking about there could be like a break fee, there could be things along those where if you break it unnecessarily, they have to pay you a certain amount, and just kind of going through what you can do for termination and who can terminate and why. And because our company was sold in a really unique way, we actually had to do it kind of like an options agreement, because I sold it as an LLC to a C Corp, which if you go through like taxation, you can't, a C Corp, if you plan on having a liquidity event, always start as a C Corp. So that's just as an aside, because you can do the tax treatment. You can do this thing called QSBS, if you hold your shares for 5 years, you can get up to $10 million in tax-free benefit on cap gains. And then from there, you can do a C Corp for C Corp non-taxable exchange. So you can do a share exchange. And I was an LLC and I did not know that. And I never built the business to sell. For me, it was more of like a cash flow business. And it was going to be triggered, and we were going to owe tens of millions of dollars in taxes without having a dollar. And so it literally would have been in a transaction that would have bankrupted most of the investors. And so we actually had to structure it as an options agreement that struck as soon as that happened. So that was a really fun process to go through. And then besides that one, the big one was the audit. My God. It is a totally different level. If you've never gone through an audit, I had so my sister worked at KPMG and I had no idea what she did every day. And once I got through this process, I was like, oh my gosh, I have so much respect for her and her husband and everyone that has gone through the process, because it's tough. So not only is an audit hard, because you have to go through 3 years of financials, you have to get a GAAP and IFRS, because we are operating in Canada as well as the United States, so different accounting standards that you have to map to. We had to do a cash only audit for all of our logs. And as a crazy like aside, like we used to transfer cash with Navy SEALs. Like it was the most absurd thing. So we had a flower showroom down in LA and we had a place up here, and it was so consequential. You only have to lose $2 million once and be in a really, really tough position. So we hired Navy SEALs that had insurance. These guys were the most they were the most intense. So they would drive these armored cars. They would drive like $2 million in cannabis down. They would bring $2 million up in cash. We would be able to like deposit it in banks or pay out the farmers in cash. And so I had to have logs of that whole thing for the audit. And you can imagine what the auditors were thinking. They were like, God, this is
this is not legit.
100%. And I'm so lucky. Our finance person is amazing. Sam Arcolano, he just nailed it. So he had just behind the scenes had just been done everything just to the T. So we got through that. But really the hard thing for me was what's called agent fee principle. So you have to go through these memos and stuff like that when you go through these different auditing firms. And agent fee principle is like a broker, right? So like let's say I'm a real estate agent that sells $1 million house and I make 30 grand in commission. So you didn't make $1 million in revenue, you made $30,000 because you were the broker on that sale, right? Because you didn't actually own the house, you were just a broker for it. So the claim that they were making in the beginning that I had to fight for is that they were saying, oh, well, I think that you're a flower broker. And we're like, no, we're wholesalers. We take ownership and risk of it. And so I had to write all of these memos. And just to explain why that's consequential, it would have taken our revenue from like $100 million down to like $40 million, which would have killed the SPAC deal. It would have not allowed us to get to the financials that we needed. It would have killed the M&A transaction. It would have killed everything. So like I'm sitting here first time through an audit, working with this people. I had this amazing consultant that I worked through, Sean Moore, just such a good guy. And when I got done with that process, it was so stressful. I straight up collapsed. Like I got my blood tested after I sold the company and I actually just obliterated my adrenal. It took me a full year to heal afterwards.
Yes. I can absolutely relate to that. And I think it's really important for people to hear that because first of all, you were in, again, such a, stigmatized industry and working in cash. It's actually funny how many similarities there are between what you're describing in cannabis and precious metals mining.
Yeah.
Flying in places and being met with guys with AK-47s and how stuff gets transported. I'm like, I never drew the parallels because I didn't really work in cannabis. But, I think it's probably auditor school 101. Day one is like, large amounts of cash are suspicious. But what I do think everyone goes through, and if you've never been through the sale of a business, this is something you need to be prepared for, is you have to explain and often justify your business in certain ways to people who are buying it. And you would think, if they're buying the business, they know it. But every business, every model, how it's been built, and even to your point, LLC versus C Corp, there's so many decisions that get made and so many ways of working and so many nuances. And everything has to get so clear in a transaction to be sure that both sides are on the same page. If you think about your day-to-day interactions, we all know how many filters we hear things through and see things through in life. It's very similar in business. So the memos are real.
They're so real.
Yes. The, understanding, right? Like, are we a, $100 million business or are we a $30 million business? I mean, that's a whole different ballgame. And that comes down to whether you own the product or not. And again, really similar experiences I've had when I was doing a $2 billion divestment for a mining company for a portion, where we had to go through and had to know at the moment of sale product that was on boats in warehouses all over the world, and all of it had different terms, which I'm not going to get into here, it's so complicated, but every sale has different terms as to when ownership transfers at the port, on the boat, in the warehouse, when you take possession, and who it transfers to at what point. And like that kind of thing can make such a difference as to like, what is the value of things the company owns at the moment when a sale takes place. So there's just a lot of nuances, and for some people this might be really boring, but I just want to clarify, if there are people who are listening to understand this a little bit more, these are the things you got to be ready for. And this is why, if you've never been through it, to your point, like having advisors is key.
100%. You have to, because the lawyers, they're guiding you through every single stage of the process. I mean, and you pay through it. We paid about $400,000 for our legal team for that kind of like 4-month period. So you're definitely paying through it. And then your investment banker is really going to walk you through every stage of the negotiation process. They're going to help you guide, the whole thing. Some take it over completely. Some kind of work side by side with you, but without them, it'd be impossible to get through.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, and then so you've got you mentioned the inventory side too, which we don't have to go too far into, but having that point in time to map that much inventory. And the other thing that people don't realize is this thing called materiality. So as your company gets bigger, it's actually easier to go through the process. Like for instance, like you have to like account, because SISU was like a certain size. They were like, oh, you need to account for like up to like $500 or something. So like things couldn't be off like, inventory. Whereas like Wells Fargo, they only have to be off by like $1 billion. So they're like, oh, if this $25 million is missing in said account, they're like, oh, no, you're fine. And you're like, what? How is that possible?
I have so many moments like this in my career. I sat in the room with the deal team for a client at one point in my KPMG days. And the head of the transaction team on the client side was this like incredible woman in the UK. She's an amazing American woman. And, we're going through our weekly thing. We have a structure of letting them know, where we're at, and she said, I don't get out of bed for less than $3 million. Don't bring me any problems that are less than that. Like, don't come to me, just deal with it. Like that was her threshold for, and this is, we're talking like a multi-billion-dollar transaction. So it makes sense. But I don't think I'll ever get over that. Like, I'm like, I want to be the person that doesn't get out of bed for less than $3 million. Like,
so wild.
It's true, right? It's like forest for the trees. But yeah, I remember that when she said that, I was just like, okay.
Noted. It's another world when you get to that level for sure.
Yeah. But no, it's true, right? Like you're, even if you're talking about, $1 million and you're arguing over, $5, it's like, yes, they add up, but you have to kind of figure out the materiality. I think that's a really, really solid point.
Exactly. And then the last phase of the process, that this was one of the craziest things is, yeah, in the process I was absorbing into LCV, so it was like SISU, LCV, and then like the company. But then we also did a dual transaction to where we merged in with Kaliva, and Kaliva was working with Rock Nation, which was also working with JayZ. So we had a five-way negotiation as we went through the process. It was the most intense thing because everyone's just like has guns drawn, and you're just like, okay, who's going to sit down? Everyone just chill out. We all have to do it. And I remember we would have multiple nights where it'd be like 2, 3, 4 a.m. that we would go through the process. And really, like, one of the crescendos and one of the things I was really proud about, and this was the scariest thing in the world for me, is like, I remember being on the phone with JayZ's people, and they're like, you need to give back all of, like, the cash component we need to knock down. And the cash component was like going to our employees. That was where they were going to get paid. And I remember that moment. I was like shaking in the conference room, and I just had to do it because I just told them, I was like, I will never be able to live with myself if I back down on this and I don't take care of my employees and the people that built this company. And there was this long silence. And it's like, okay. And it was just one of those things where you're just negotiating against the most intense sharks, and you have this one defining moment, and you just have to stick to your values during the process because you will be challenged at every level when you go through it.
Yeah. When we did, negotiations training in the MBA, you had to know your BATNA, best alternative to negotiating.
Yeah.
I think it is something that has always stuck with me. Like, you have to know when you're going to walk away. And it is insane. I mean, you've just described this, the numbers we've been talking about, the work that's gone in, the opportunity, but you're going to live with decisions for the rest of your life. So I think that's crazy.
Yeah, they do not mess around. JayZ's Lieutenant Desiree she's as intense as they get, that's for sure.
I was going to say, you also were dealing with, really big personalities, even I think beyond what is typical in business transactions of that size. So that's just amazing.
Yeah. And like literally 2 or 3 weeks before, they had sold $500 million to LVHM or whatever. They sold Ace of Spades. And so that was coming off that. So they were feeling very strong in that position for negotiating, and rightfully so, right?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. So what was kind of the closeout of this process?
Yeah, the closeout of the process is it's almost a blur at this point, but after you get through the auditing process, you're signing purchase and sale agreements. You have these massive, I mean, you are just, because you're sending it out to hundreds of people, so you're just aggregating all of the signatures and going through that. You build what's called a waterfall schedule, which shows kind of who's going to get what at what stage. And then from there, you're doing like distributions last second because you're just running up against this clock. And then you've got a massive you have multiple sets of legal teams. Not only do you have the deal level teams, but you've got the whole like IPO level teams. So you've got probably 3 layers of accountants, you've got 3 layers of lawyers. And then by the time you get done, it is so surreal because I wish we could have done it in person, but you just have this surreal moment, which it was COVID. So we had to do it digitally. But we literally jumped on a Zoom call like this, and we had worked until like 3, 4 a.m. the night before, and we were literally going live at like 6:30 a.m. when the stock market opened. And so we have like, you sleep for like an hour or whatever, and then you get to the office, and everyone just comes up. You have 40 people on the screen, and then you just watch that moment happen. And it's 3, 2, 1. Boom. And it's one of those things where it's like, I don't know. It was a fun one because you just think about every level along the chain. You think about all of the people that made it possible. You think about the moment they used to like sleep on the floor when it was 400 square feet and it was 3 people. And it's just, it definitely is a surreal experience. So it was fun.
For anyone who doesn't know, can you just explain the significance of ringing the bell?
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably going to explain it poorly, but yeah, ringing the bell is where you're going through the process to where your company is going to be listed on the stock exchange, and you've got this moment right before it where you get to ring the bell and everyone cheers, and then your stock ticker is like thrown up on the screen and everything like that. If you ever see that on Times Square, and it's where the moment where your company goes live and you're officially a public company.
Yeah. So that's another layer to what you were doing, right? So everything you're talking about is about you're selling a company, but you were selling the company as it was becoming a publicly traded entity, which is just like
Exactly.
a whole other level of like craziness. And, the due diligence in that, obviously, as you described, was just of a depth and intensity. So I know you've talked a lot as we've gone through this process around the foundations of building a great business and of some of the things that you hadn't necessarily intended to sell and you had to deal with, but really having a focus on the foundations of your business being so solid and why this ends up kind of mattering later on. Is there a couple stories that you want to share? I know you've got so many around kind of
And
the roles.
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. For me, I follow this guy. His name's Ray Dalio, runs Bridgewater Associates. Gosh, $180 billion hedge fund. This guy is an unbelievable mind, and he wrote this book called Principles, and I followed it ever since. I think it's incredibly important to have a set of personal principles as well as business principles, and it's just really simple things that people can say and kind of follow along with, and it becomes the core and the heart of your business. And so one of the, just a few of them as I kind of go through them is one of the things that I like is the pace of the leader is the pace of the pack. So one of the things that, I'm excited as soon to be a father this year, but one of the things that I learned as a child is that I didn't do what dad said. I did what dad did. Whatever your parents did, you would emulate their actions, not their words. And so for me, servant leadership is everything because I don't want
Yes.
to ever ask someone to do something that I would not do myself because it permeates through every aspect of your culture. And that to me is one of the most important things that you can do. So that was one. The other one is life is a game of inches. I kind of alluded to it earlier, but just, every action, every single day, you're either gaining an inch versus your competition, yourself, or you're losing an inch. And so it doesn't matter if you're gaining and habit stacking, if you're building a company every single day, if you're just getting 1% better, if you look over the course of years, it's imperceptible in days and months, but over years, and more importantly, over decades, it turns into miles. And that one's super important. And then one of my personal favorites is the top threes. So I read this book called The One Thing, and it's always stuck with me, is you need to always know what your top three things are. We also match that with ruthless prioritization because people oftentimes, and this happens all the time in business, I'd say it's one of the number one reasons I see people fail is because they focus on what's urgent, not what's important. And
Yes.
everything is always urgent. And the best people that I see that run businesses, they say no all the time to almost everything. Because if you say yes to everything, you're going to dilute your efforts. And I don't care if you are Elon Musk and the most talented person on earth, if you spread yourself too thin, you will fail. And there is a breaking point for every human. So you have to focus.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm often will use like a urgency importance quadrant really early on, the founders, to teaching them like you have to get out of the urgency and you have to be focusing just so hardcore on the important things, which are the long-term development, the strategy, the things that'll move the needle on your business. And actually, when you do that, you get your business into shape so less stuff falls into the urgent bucket. But you have to, and you have to figure that out. Like, I totally agree.
It's so important. And what happens is that then it waterfalls down because when people see what you do, then it starts going down and then everyone and it ripples through your entire organization. So that's why it's so critical.
Totally.
Yeah. And then last but not least, the other two that I like is, one is going to be frugality. If you look at Jeff Bezos, he used to literally just like take a table, like a $5 table and put that down. I love that story from the beginning of Amazon. So we used to have $10 folding chairs that we would all sit. And that was, that was how everyone started. You got like a $10 folding table. We would just sit in these little folding chairs. And then we eventually graduated to get normal chairs, which was a huge plus for everyone. But it just makes you appreciate it makes you appreciate just like the little things, right? And having that culture of frugality, because what people forget is that capital is the lifeblood inside of a company. And if you run out of money, the game's over. You go to zero. And so you have to protect it like your life depends on it because your company runs on it. And then the last thing is one of my personal favorites is I do not care about being right. I care about finding truth. That's the pursuit of my life. And if you can find truth, you can make the best business decisions and life decisions possible. And so when it came to my team, it's an idea meritocracy to where the best idea wins. I don't care who it comes from. And by having that and seeking truth and having an open environment for healthy discourse, you can create a great company.
Yes, I love both of those. I think frugality is so, we talked about tech and the spend, and it's great when you can, but really, like, there's a reason that burn rate is one of the primary metrics for venture capital, right? You need to know, the company needs to know their burn rate and what levers they can pull, to manage it and to be able to do that. I'd love to ask two quick questions if you have time.
Yeah, hear me. Of
Yeah.
course.
So, I 100% agree on the frugality and like same, but I'm wondering, one of the challenges is when you are, being so frugal and your team is, following your lead and really grinding, how did your team feel about the office furniture is kind of my first question. I mean, that probably is a communication thing, but the follow-up to that is also, what do you think you should be spending on? Like, where should you be, investing and spending rather than on things like furniture?
It's a great call. I mean, yeah, I guess multiple things. So you had to balance both sides. So while we had like a very frugal culture, we would also like do like the fun things. Like Joe, I was team not fun, team get stuff so done as fast as possible. Joe was like, he was just the yin to my yang. So he would like make dodgeball groups and like do stuff during lunch and like all that. So he always like did those things that were like that made it fun, that were not like super crazy, and I love that. And then the other thing is that people understood the mission, because once you're a mission-driven company that's pushing towards something, we were 2% of GDP for Humble. 1 in 50 people ate because of what we did at SISU. And that mattered for the community. And because it was mission-driven, people knew that the business mattered. And what I told the team is just, this keeping financially frugal mattered because we're protecting 150 people that work at this company. And when you knew that you were doing those things because it protected your fellow teammate, it felt different. It felt like you were protecting a family and this group that you cared about. Whereas, when you have these infinite funds with venture capital in Silicon Valley, you could just, like kind of, it's just about me. Whereas it just built us more together as a team and just focused on the mission they were heading towards.
Totally. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Similar in our startup. And I remember I was the same. I was the fun police and my business partner.
Yeah, exactly.
Visionary, he was like dad who comes home with like pizza.
100%. Yeah.
But we would have we had a brewing company next door that was a good friend of his, had been roommates at one point. They grew and super successful. And we would stock our fridge with, all the stuff from them basically for free. Like, we would find ways to try to make it nice, have the perks. We do some outings, but they were, it was never really expensive. We just found ways to make it fun. And we were a tech company. So, we would go to the latest VR experience. And it was kind of research/fun. But
exactly.
The vision and the buy-in and the people who want to grow with you, and to tie it back to our point earlier, especially if you pick them up in a down market, and they came on board for the mission and took maybe a lower compensation, having them see where you're headed and what's how they're going to grow with you it's been huge. I love the truth seeking. You think it ties to the servant leadership as well, where it's the success of the company, the success of the team is your success. You're there to debottleneck, enable, empower, all of the things. Yep. What do you think is the number one, piece of advice you would tell someone who wants to build that in their team? What's the key success factor? How does it start to allow people to challenge you or speak up? And because it's not something they'll necessarily have had from previous experiences.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I guess it kind of came naturally for me because I guess that's kind of how we were. But I think it has to start through every sublayer. So for instance, let's say I'm the CEO and you've got the managers that are right below you. If they challenge you, no one 3 layers below is going to be the first person to be like, hey, let's do this. But Joe and Shannon would challenge me all the time in meetings, and I loved it. We had this meeting called Where's the Money? And I would just get uppercutted with questions, just be like, what about this? What about this? What about this? And once it starts with the manager level, then you can bring it down and be like, okay, who else has ideas? We're not going to leave this room until we have ideas going through this. And then it just got further and further kind of down the chain to where everyone in that whole meeting was participating. And then over time, it just ingrains in your culture. So I think the first piece of advice is just make sure that your direct reports feel like they can instantly give you feedback as fast as possible. And then from there, it can ripple down to the rest of the company.
Amazing. I love that. I want to be mindful of your time, John. You've been so generous with it. And we've covered so much. So I'm really excited to get this out and share it if people weren't able to join live. Is there anything you want to leave us with? Last insights, parting thoughts?
Oh no, I think that this was just a great process. I'm excited for the next stage to come. I'm actually building a company right now in the generative AI space. So that's going to be fun. It's called Play-Doh, and we're going to be launching in probably the next 3 or 4 weeks. So, education is near and dear to my heart. I think that really the way that I look at life is that there's 2 ways to kind of expand human civilization. One is to expand the population, because you're going to have like going to Mars and doing all that stuff. The other is to increase the education of civilization, to then create and convert more people. And so education for me is the foundation of civilization. And that's why I care so much about it. So there's a lot of different ways that people can make money in the AI space, but I'm going to throw my hat in the ring in education because it matters. And so that's the same reason why I'm doing the stuff that I'm doing with Fig Time, and why I'm just giving away content for free, because in the different stages of my life, I just want to give back, because I've had other people that have been so generous with their time with me. So yeah.
I love it. I'm so excited to see, Play-Doh. It's been so quick since our kind of initial conversation, which is very much the theme in the AI space right now. Quick. I will link, at Fig Time being your Instagram, where people can watch the videos that you're putting out that are so insightful and helpful. And obviously your LinkedIn, where we've been streaming this. Is there anywhere else that people can kind of find out more about you, or things that you would want to direct them to that we can include for people to find you?
I think that's perfect. Yeah, just do the social media, and that's probably the best place to go. And people can always reach out to me directly from there.
Amazing. Thank you again, John, for your time. This has been such a great conversation.
Oh, thanks so much. I appreciate it.
All right. Take care.
Great. See ya.
Thanks for tuning in. Our goal is to create connections and inspire conversations. So please subscribe, rate, review, and share this podcast with your network if you enjoyed today's episode. Sharing is caring. If you're ready to take your business to the next level and are curious how I can help, click the link in the episode notes to schedule a call. Got questions or topics you want us to discuss? Click the link in the episode notes to share them with us. Your question might even get featured in an upcoming episode. And remember, this podcast is not intended to replace legal, tax, or other kinds of professional advice. Thanks for joining us on this adventure. We'll catch you on the flip side.